project team, the project team that you have here. Um, the project team starts with the City of Elk Grove, and we have Mike Costa here, who will be doing part of the presentation. He's waving. Terry Easley is here as well, and she's the project manager for the City of Elk Grove. Her bandwidth is a little limited, so she's not on video here, but she is with us. And if there's questions that we need, she'll be more than happy to answer them for us. We have Sasha Pajik, and he is, did I get your last name right, Sasha? Did I get close? Okay.
It's good enough. It's good enough.
Excellent. All right. He's with Stantec, and he is he's the project manager for the consultant. And then David Burbich is with Stantec as well. David, do you want to wave? Perfect. And then I have my two compatriots, Nicole and Hannah, who are also helping on this project. So that's your project team this evening.
And Amanda McDaniel as well as Stantec.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss Amanda? Sorry, Amanda, and there you are, sitting right in the middle. My apologies. Okay, do we want to maybe share the screen and we can kind of go through the agenda? So this evening we'll be introducing the Zero Emission Bus Transition Project and talk a little bit about why the city's undertaking this, and share a little bit of what they hope to accomplish from this. We'll also share, talk a little bit about the planning process and then the possible implementation of it. So yeah, that's the agenda. And from there, I think I will turn it over to Mike Costa, who will talk a little bit about, give you a little bit of project background information.
Thank you, Gladys. Thank you also, Sasha, for transitioning the slide. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background, of course, on our service, our transit system and the service that we provide here in the city of Elk Grove. And then I'll explain a little bit about what this project is. But as some of you may be aware, the city of Elk Grove does operate a transit service called e-tran that we contract with Sacramento Regional Transit to provide those services. But we do have services that are provided both within our city limits and also services that are commuter or express-like services to Sacramento and other parts of the region. In our service, in our system, we operate a fleet of 46 buses. They are all operated and powered using compressed natural gas or CNG fuel, which is the technology path that we have right now in our system. And typically our fleet of 46 buses, their lifespan is somewhere between they last between 12 to 15 years on average. And our fleet right now, the age of our average age is between 6 and 13 years. Next slide, please. I think we missed a slide.
There we go.
There we go. Perfect. As I mentioned before, at the City of Elk Grove, the e-tran service, our fixed route services operate both within the city limits, which you can see are 7 local routes that operate typically Monday through Fridays around 6 a.m. to about the latest runs around 10 p.m. in the local routes. And then we do have some limited local service as well on Saturdays. And then we have 10 commuter routes. 8 of those are commuter routes during the in one direction during the morning, they head up to Sacramento, and then in the other direction in the afternoon, they head back from Sacramento to Elk Grove, as you can see kind of in the diagram to your right. And then 2 of those routes are actually reverse out of Sacramento as well in the mornings and PM peak periods. And those typically operate in the mornings between about 5:30 to 8:30 in the morning. And then again in the afternoons from about 2:30, 3 o'clock-ish to about 5:30, 6 o'clock. Next slide, please. On average, on a typical weekday, what this slide shows is how many buses of our 46 bus fleet. It shows how many buses are in service during a typical period of the day. You can see that in the most utilized point of the day, or our highest service period, which is usually our afternoon peak, you can see that we operate, of the 46 buses, we operate up to 38 of those buses. So this slide kind of gives you an idea on average of how many buses are out on the road at any given point throughout the day. And of course, in the middle of the day, you have a little bit of less services because the commuter buses are not operating, and they're at the lot. So you can see those peak periods when the commuter buses are in service, and of course the local buses operate from that period window of about 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Next slide, please.
So,
Oh, sorry. Are we gonna go ahead?
yeah. Or is this? Yeah. Happy to do so. So,
I think this was my slide, but I can.
sorry. Please, I was too eager.
That's okay. But so I'll just introduce, before I introduce Sasha to jump into the details, I'll introduce the project. As many of you are aware, or some of you may not be aware, the California Air Resources Board back in 2018 mandated that transit fleets throughout the state of California begin developing a transition plan to transition their fleet technologies and their bus technology essentially over to zero emission technologies. This plan was developed in kind of a phased approach, which essentially had a target date of converting entire fleets of transit throughout California by 2040 to zero emission technologies. For smaller agencies like the city of Elk Grove, the mandate that CARB released, or the California Air Resources Board, said that in the year 2023, we would have to begin purchasing at least 25% of our new vehicles purchased, or new buses purchased, would have to be zero emission technology. So for instance, example, if we purchased 4 buses, at least one of those would have to be a zero emission bus by 2023. So what this effort that we're doing and what this project is about is essentially planning for the conversion of the city of Elk Grove's CNG fleet, or compressed natural gas fleet, over to zero emission technologies. So with that, again, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sasha, who's going to be explaining kind of what we have done so far in this planning effort and what are kind of the next steps.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so the project that Stantec was signed up to do, and the team, is essentially to look at how do we get from where we are today with CNG to that future zero emission bus state. So our work program is multifaceted. We start first with looking at what are some of the existing conditions in the community and how do they work towards achieving the zero emission bus goal. From there, we did some energy modeling. We'll talk a little bit about that, where we have to determine the amount of energy that's required with an electric bus to be able to provide the service. We then look at what are the items that need to be fixed up at the garage, or added, or improved to be able to transition, and then look at kind of the financial plan and all that while we're still working through that. So, from some of our early analysis, we're fortunate that e-tran operates services that are mostly within the capabilities of ZEBs, meaning, much like electric car, there's a certain range that comes with these electric buses. And the majority of the routes that e-tran operates, and the way that they're put together, called blocks, essentially lend themselves really well to zero emission bus technology. So that's a plus as we go into this plan. We're also fortunate that the facility itself, where e-tran houses the buses, is large, and that gives us a lot of room to work and introduce new infrastructure and make those improvements that are required at the facility. Where some peers across California are really working with very constrained spaces, that's not the case at e-tran, so we're fortunate from that perspective. There's also the fact that every transit agency, as Mike mentioned, has to do this in California. So the neighboring transit properties, SAC-RT and others, are also going through this transition, and there may be an opportunity there to collaborate on the zero emission bus infrastructure if we match up in terms of the type of bus and the services that we're looking to provide. So, starting off just with a broad definition of what is a zero emission bus. The California Air Resources Board has defined 2 different types of technologies. First is a battery electric bus. So a battery electric bus, much like, as I kind of mentioned, a car, you plug it in and you charge it up, and there's batteries on board the bus. That energy that's stored within the battery packs is then used to move the bus. With a hydrogen fuel cell electric bus, it's also considered an electric bus. So what happens there is that there is a hydrogen fuel cell, which then through a process of osmosis and other fun science aspects with oxygen creates that hydrogen into electricity, which is then also stored in a battery on the bus, which is then used to move the bus forward and to propel it. So both are deemed electric buses. It's just the difference in the efficiency of how that electricity is provided. A hydrogen bus is refueled by filling up a tank. There's usually a tank either, and it's in kilograms. It's a 37.5 kilogram tank or a 50 kilogram tank, depending on the bus manufacturer. And that gets filled up, and that tank lasts for as long as it does, and it's used to make that process work. So when we go down this road and we look at uh, identifying which technology is most optimal for e-trans, there's 6 things that we're looking at. First is those fueling options. So we're looking at, in terms of electricity, if we're looking at battery electric buses, we're looking at, what is the price of electricity? How does that affect our strategy and our operational costs? We're looking at the same things on the hydrogen side. Hydrogen's a little bit more of an expensive fuel right now because there just isn't that much supply or demand. But as other agencies in California are going through this transition, that's starting to change very quickly. So that's one aspect we look at. Then we look at what is that infrastructure that's required. So if it's an electric bus, like a battery electric bus, we're talking about chargers. So chargers are either at the depot, so where the buses are housed and parked, or they are on street, where basically as the vehicles are out in service, they may need to top up their charge. So if they're at a terminal somewhere and the bus is there for 10, 15 minutes, it could receive a charge. On the hydrogen side, much like the CNG technology that we have nowadays, it's a fueling station, a little bit more compact. It's on site, and you fill up a tank, and away you go. So those are the infrastructure pieces that we look at. Then we look at the operations itself and how e-trans operates its services. So there's a number of items that we need to look at in terms of how the service is scheduled, how these routes are all put together. We look at training. We look at all sorts of different things that affect how the service on the street and how an electric bus fleet could impact that. We look at operating mileage. So right now, the best battery electric bus has a range approximately of 180-ish miles. Um, so when we look at, what are the lengths that e-trans is running on its route, and they do it a number of times throughout the day, can we make that mileage work? Same on the fuel cell side, those buses are roughly around 300 miles nowadays. But of course, that technology is constantly improving, and that's evolving, and we consider that in our plan. We then look at the fleet size. We're trying to manage, in an ideal, we're trying to replace one CNG bus with one electric bus, either BB or fuel cell. But that's not always possible just because of the technological limitations. So we're looking at those things, and obviously cost. It all comes down to cost, and uh, when we put all this stuff together, it points us in a direction that makes the most sense for the agency. In terms of community benefits, I mean, the premise of moving to zero emission buses is noble. There's a number of benefits. Looking at air quality, this California has some of the worst air in the world, unfortunately. And that's something that that's the real driver behind this. It's to change it and to make communities healthier and reduce those health ailments and such that is related with poor air quality and pollution. Less noise. I don't know if you've ever seen an electric bus. Maybe you've been in Los Angeles or somewhere else where they already have electric buses, or in San Francisco, but uh, very quiet. You can't really hear them, which is nice. Again, that's less noise pollution for the community. Sometimes they're too quiet, and in fact, we have to add noisemakers on the vehicle so people know and can hear the bus coming. Uh, that's another challenge, but we consider that. I mentioned communities. We're looking at the overall enhancing the public realm and environmental justice outcomes. We look at those communities that are most vulnerable, and we make sure that they're addressed too through this transition and not left behind. And last, we talked about those reduced emissions. It meets the GHG reduction targets set by the state, and it's helping us and putting us in the right direction in terms of community benefits. So, in some of the challenges that we look at in this transition, um, yeah, it's not as simple as, today I'm running a CNG bus and tomorrow I buy either a battery electric bus or a hydrogen bus. There's a lot to consider. And this change is not one where, we flick a switch and today it's one bus and tomorrow it's another bus. It's a systematic change to the whole way that the agency operates, the way that the vehicles are maintained. There's a lot of pieces that need to be considered in this transition, excuse me. The costs, as we've kind of mentioned, they go beyond just the bus. There's all that infrastructure. There's a training. There's a whole ensuite of other aspects that need to be considered and priced out. We look at the electrical utility needs. We need to make sure that there is enough. If we're going the battery electric bus route, we need to make sure there is enough power for us to be able to charge up that fleet. And it's a pretty heavy demand, and we need to come up with a strategy that makes sure that we can achieve that. And it's last looking at the impacts to how we design and deliver service. We may have to change schedules through this process, or we may have to augment. I mean, those are things that may happen. We don't know today until we change the technology. But the goal is to minimize the impact through this transition for all of our riders and others in the community. So this kind of graphic here summarizes what we like to put up, talk about in terms of what to consider when implementing a fleet. As you can appreciate, there's a lot of pieces, and our job here is to align all these pieces and make sure they're all pointing in the same direction and talking to each other. So we're looking at the upgrades that are required in the garage. We're looking at how do we pay for all this. We're looking at there's certain collective agreements and work rules that operators have, and we need to make sure that we can work within the realms of those too through this transition. We're looking at how do we store power, and maybe there's an opportunity where we're buying power when it's less costly during the day, and and storing it on site to be able to charge up our fleet to kind of minimize some of our costs. Looking at how does this all interconnect with smart cities and resilient power transmission. We do have issues in the state with power downs, and that's something that we need to mitigate across, and we have to plan for that through this transition as well. In terms of our modeling process and what we look at when we're trying to identify the amount of power and energy that is required to move the bus, we first look at what are the e-trans's bus schedules, and we look at how much time do we have in the schedule to work with. We then look at what is the bus specification. There's a number of buses on the market right now, and there's new buses emerging pretty much, but there's some pretty main players. We look at what are those specifications and what the OEMs are telling us is a likely outcome. We're then looking at the driving cycles, meaning how many times does the bus stop and start when it's on a route. How many are there traffic impediments where we're hitting traffic, heavy traffic during rush hour, which is causing the bus to stop and go a lot. It's also looking at how many passengers are on the bus. If the bus is heavier, it's using more electricity. If we're going up a hill, that uses more electricity. So we have to look at all these things to try and predict what what the likely outcome is. We then look at ambient conditions. I mean, we get hot summers, so air conditioning is particularly a heavy draw on the bus and the battery pack. We have to model for that. We try and consider the impacts of that. I talked about greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, the statistics that are up on the screen now are considering e-trans's current service and buses. When we look at from a annual emissions tonnage, roughly 4,600 tons of GHGs are emitted by e-trans's CNG buses. Now, the cautionary note here is that we don't need to necessarily focus on some of those emissions and saying that this is a bad number. That's not the point. It's if people riding transit overall were a lot lower, but CNG is a clean technology, but the other two are a little bit cleaner. So when we look at the green bars where the electric buses are, we're projecting that if we transition to an entirely battery electric bus fleet, we're roughly around the 800 tons of GHGs per year. And that comes, when we consider the source of the electricity in California, we have a lot of solar, a lot of wind power. That makes the energy a lot cleaner. That's going to be used to charge buses. When we look at hydrogen, a little bit of a dirtier process, somewhere in the 2,300 to 2,200 tons per year of emissions. There's two different ways to make hydrogen. One is on site using electrolysis, and that's a process where you're drawing electricity, you're drawing water, and you're making hydrogen. The other is steam methane reform, which is a byproduct of oil and gas production. And right now, it's a little bit cleaner to use steam methane reform as a source of hydrogen on hydrogen fuel cell buses. When we look at what the equivalent is per cars, one CNG bus is equivalent to about 24 cars per year. When we look at BEVs, we're equivalent to roughly 4 cars per year. So a lot cleaner, a lot better for everyone. The last slide here that I'll speak to is to basically we summarize kind of all these evaluations to compare the technology. So when we looked at 3 different types of battery electric buses. First, the battery electric bus that's in depot charge only. Then we looked at battery electric bus that is with both in depot and en route. So it requires a top up somewhere along the operating realm of the day. And last, the hydrogen fuel cell electric bus. So we look at travel range. The in depot, it has the least amount of range because you basically charge it up overnight or while the bus is back in the yard, and it goes out, and there's really no other opportunity for it to top up until it comes back to the facility. When we look at the en route charging, that has some of the best potential. Theoretically, it's kind of endless because you can top up, but you need to have that ability to top up, meaning there's got to be enough time in the schedule for the buses to be, and also not inconvenience passengers where they're sitting on a bus that's charging when they'd rather be moving. So that's something we got to consider. Hydrogen fuel cell electric is also a very good alternative. It's a pretty good range when we compare it to just the in-depot charge bus. From a planning and scheduling perspective, we look at how's it going to change our schedules, because if we are going battery electric, we do need to make, and we have an en route component, we do need to plan for that time and have adequate time to be able to charge up some of the buses while they're en route. So we have to consider that hydrogen fuel cell is the least difficult from a planning and scheduling perspective. When we look at it compared to CNG bus, it's virtually the same, and the transition there's a lot smoother. From an operating and dispatching perspective, again, some similar kind of story as we mentioned, planning and scheduling. Infrastructure requirements, the battery electric bus in depots, one that probably is not so complex because you're just making those changes at the yard. When we look at en route, we have to look at where can we put chargers, and is the land available to us? Do we own the land, or does somebody else own it? And do we need some sort of a partnership to consider that? Hydrogen fuel cell, it's a lot simpler. It's a fueling system that's on site at the facility. There's really no other interventions required or other outreach. Look at training requirements. All of them essentially require the same training requirements. Mechanics need to be trained up to understand how to work on a high voltage vehicle. It's a little different than working on a internal combustion engine. There's a lot of different parts, and it's just there's some pretty similar training requirement. We just need to account for that. In terms of cost of ownership, the hydrogen fuel cell bus is the most expensive option right now. Looking then at the battery electric bus en route, that's the second most expensive option, because we have to have that technology on board to be able to receive a charge. It's en route, it's extra product on the vehicle, and the battery pack size also is different. And then when we look at the in-depot charge, that's the least costly from the transition perspective. Last, we look at the agency itself. So the way that e-trans operates, its ethos and its ecosystem, as well as then the service area that it's operating in, to determine kind of the fit from that perspective. The en route charging is probably one of the more difficult technologies, again, because we do have to have that technology out in the street to be able to charge, and we need to find locations and have partners willing to work with us to make that happen. The other two are fairly straightforward: hydrogen fuel cell and battery electric, because those are done at the depot.